I'm but a humble shepherd, and I'm a little nervous. This is far out of my comfort zone. I'm a shepherd. I don't speak to people. I don't go where people are. You make me nervous. Sheep listen better. I spend night and day with my flock, 365 days a year. It's not a glamorous job by any means, but it's steady and it's predictable, except for that night. That night, and if you'd go there with me, I'll take you. It was a chilly night. It wasn't bitter like you might think. It was chilly. There's no snow on the ground. The stars were like a blanket, millions of them in the sky. More than anyone dare count, because we didn't have air pollution and we didn't have light pollution from the cities. And so you could just touch the stars. And it was a gorgeous and beautiful night just to be alive. It's the off-season of farming and agriculture, and so there was sparse grass here and there, which made feeding your animals just a tad bit harder. There were bushes here and there up in the hills. The olive trees look dead, but they're not. They'll be back. They'll be back come spring, and they'll have their olives once again. All of the cultivation was basically done. And so for a shepherd like me, there was very little to do but wait and tend my sheep. Sheep are picky. It was harder to feed them this time of year. Sheep are like your children. They don't eat their broccoli, do they? No, and Brussels sprouts, no way. My sheep were a little picky too during this time of year. But basically, my life was one with no big events, nothing to surprise you on any given day. My days were full of keeping my flock and mending fences, did a lot of mending fences, and I chased a lot of sheep, because sheep like to wander off. They don't stay where they're supposed to stay, and they're curious little critters. And so I spent a lot of time chasing sheep, and I knew them all. I knew the ones with notches in their ears, and I knew which ones had a little limp. And I knew which were the runts of the litter. I knew which ones liked to be rubbed and loved on, and I knew which ones wanted to be left alone. And I knew them all by name. And they knew my voice, and they came to me. At nighttime, I would lay down in the gate where the sheep went at nighttime in their fold. There was no gate to keep predators out. There was only me. And I would lay at the gate across. And if you wanted to get to my animals, you had to cross me first. I would die for my sheep. And every shepherd would too. And many was the time when my little sheep they'd run off and they'd fall into a crevasse somewhere. And I would be required to crawl down with ropes and go down and get them out between rocks where they'd be stuck and horrified. And I'd have to carry them out. And sometimes I'd get cut up and bruised. There were times when predators would come around, and time when I fought off a wolf for one of my lambs because they were precious to me. You see, to be a shepherd, there are requirements. You've got to be courageous at times. And to be a shepherd, you've got to be extremely patient, because sheep can be hard to deal with, as I told you. But you always have to have a heart of love when you deal with sheep. To be a shepherd, you've got to have a heart for the vulnerable and for the weak. You've got to love them. But also, when you're a shepherd like me, there's a strong sense of unworthiness. Like wherever we go, we don't belong, because to the general population, to all of the Jews, we were unclean. We were uncultured, and that's a good definition for us. I'm not arguing that. We're uncultured kind of fellas. We were unwanted. Nobody wanted a shepherd around unless you wanted a lamb. And we smelled funny because we stayed in the pastures all the time. So we smelled of earth, and we smelled of hay, and we smelled of weed, and we smelled of sheep. And that lanolin in their coats makes you have a distinct smell all the time. We smelled like sheep and earth. So nobody wanted us in their home. We would mess up your Christmas dinner. The temple was another story. We didn't have time to go to temple. To go to temple, we had to leave our sheep behind. We had to care for sheep. And our flocks to us were more important than ritual. We were spiritual men, but we were not religious men. So we didn't go to the temple. And when we did show up at the temple, everyone looked at us weird. And here's why. Because they thought the dirt on our hands equated to a dirty soul. And they thought if the outside was dirty, then the inside must be flawed. And at nighttime, when I would lay at the gate, I would so often look up at the stars and I would ask God, why would you ever even notice me? I'm so insignificant and my life is meaningless. Why would the God of the universe even know that I exist? And while I was thinking that, the world stood still. The sheep stopped their bleeding. I was just leaning on my staff, just trying to figure out a way to stay warm. And I heard a voice that literally stopped my heart. I thought it was going to jump right out of my chest. And all at once, an angel appeared. An angel of God, and a mighty angel, and his light, it filled up the entire area. You could see exactly like it was daytime outside. And now, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, okay? But I know that God's angels, they're war wagons. They can kill over 100,000 people in one night. And I was scared, I'm not going to lie. My knees were shaking, and I was quaking, and I thought maybe I was going to wet my tunic coming. I was scared to death at this angel. And the angel said, "Do not be afraid." That's easy for him to say. I was shaking. And in my mind, I was thinking, what'd I do wrong? How can somebody that nobody cares about, that's an outcast everywhere he goes, what did I do wrong that God's going to come see? One of his angels is going to see me. And here's what he said. Don't be afraid. Why, I'm bringing you tidings of great joy. For today in Bethlehem, a child is born, the Redeemer. He's the Messiah. He's the King. And a sign for you. He gave us a sign, and he said, here's the sign. This child is in Bethlehem, and he's been born, and he's lying in a manger wrapped in cloths. And then you know what happened? If one angel wasn't scary enough, now we got thousands of them, and they're flying all over the sky, and they're singing, and their singing doesn't sound like your voices. Their singing is melodious, and it sounds like musical instruments, and it pierces your very soul, and they're singing, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, and goodwill toward men." And we were frozen. A whole bunch of my sheep passed out right there. Well, what could we do? We don't leave our sheep for anything. But when God says go, you go. And so we left our sheep in the fold, trusting that God would take care of them. And off we went to Jerusalem. And we're stubbing our toes, and we're tripping over roots, and we're trying to get there as fast as we can, but it's dark outside. And as we go, as we walk, I'm giggling. And my friend, the shepherd, his name is Chair. Chair. You see, in Hebrew, we've got these letters, and we call them gutturals. That means when you say them, you say, want to practice? Everybody go, that was terrible. Do it again. Everybody go, now you know Hebrew. I've taught you. And so I said to Chair, I was just giggling. He said, what are you laughing about? I said, God called us. How funny is that? We're going to see the Redeemer, you and I. And he said, well, I guess that is a little odd, right? And so we continued walking, and I couldn't contain myself. Oh, I'm just dying laughing. Sometimes I have to stop and get my knees. And Chair said, now what? I said, this is the greatest thing ever. You stink. He said, what do you mean I stink? I said, you stink. You stink worse than all shepherds out in the field. You lay and poop. You don't even pay attention. You step in it, you lay in it. Your sheep are always laying on you. He said, well, you stink too. I said, yes, but not as bad as you. And that's the funniest thing ever. God's going to have us guys come up that smell like poop. And we went on. And we got to Bethlehem and we followed the light and a humble abode in a barn was the baby. And he's wrapped in cloth. He's going to start in cloth, and he's going to end in cloth. From beginning to end, wrapped in cloth. And when I looked at him, I got to be honest. I looked at him, and I looked at him as this little wrinkled baby. This is the Messiah. He looks kind of pathetic. And I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe I expected a palace. Maybe a throne that he'd sit on someday. Maybe a crown that would fit his head. But Jesus obviously did not need crowns. And as me and the shepherds looked at this baby boy, we realized that we were witnessing the extraordinary. Because in the room there was a peace. There was a peace that I can't explain to you. There was a peace that I can't give to you. Only that baby can do that. There was a peace and there was a joy and there was an inexplainable light in the room. And all I could think to myself was, away in a manger, no crib for a bed. This little Messiah lays down his sweet head. The light up above us looked down where he lay. This little Redeemer asleep in the hay. And I met Joseph and Mary. Joseph looked like he just had a fight with a camel and lost. He didn't look good. The young man looked like he was really troubled and bewildered and was just shaken up. But then I saw Mary and, oh, Mary. She was beautiful. Way too young to be a mama. And now she's the mother of the Messiah. But there was a grace and a beauty about her. And as I looked at the young couple, all at once, it hit me. He's just like us. That's why they called us. That baby is just like us. He came for the weak. He came for the humble. And that's who he is. Jesus is just like us. Jesus is going to lead us to green pastures. And Jesus is going to lead us to still waters. Jesus is going to take his staff and tap us gently sometimes. And when we fall into a crevasse, Jesus is going to get us. And when we get lost, he's going to go and save us. And he's going to sit at the gate. And if anybody wants us, they're going to have to go through Jesus. He came to be just like us. Oh. And he, like us, was willing to die. And he showed us that in humility, there's power. In love, there's strength. And he's going to teach us that we have our flock, and he's got his. And his is all of mankind. And as I thought about these things, these fellows came in called wise men, seeking wisdom. They didn't look like us. They sure didn't look like me. And they didn't smell anything like Jair over there. They smelled good. They smelled like all sorts of spices. And they looked good. And they were groomed well. And they were obviously learned men. And they spoke a language we didn't understand. And they showed up with camels. And on their camels was gold, lots of gold, for a king. And they had this frankincense, which was intended for God, because he's both man, king, and God all in one. And on one camel was myrrh. And I thought a while, why myrrh? And then I thought of that look I saw on Mary's face. Absolute joy but the weight of the world on her shoulders. It's myrrh because the baby was born crucified. And at that moment, I felt such shame. Such shame. Because I didn't bring him anything. I had nothing to bring. And then it dawned on me, that's exactly who he wants, those that have nothing to bring. And what he really wants is not gold, frankincense, and myrrh. What he wants is for people to come to him with all of their humility and all of their pain and with all of their sorrows and lay them on him. And not only does he want the Jewish people, he wanted everybody. That's why those wise men were there. So we would all understand that Jesus wants everybody. All of them. You see, God saw me. He saw me. And he invited me to come see the greatest event in the history of the world. God coming near. And at that moment, I learned love is not about riches. Love is not about gifts. Love is not about ability. Love is about grace. And I was transformed. And I realized that all of us have a flock. You've got a flock. You have people to take care of. You have people to love. And Jesus, as shepherd, has the largest flock in history, the whole world. And he taught us that day that humility is power. Love is power because it mirrors the heart of God. If you want to be close to God's heart, be humble and love. I was still a shepherd. Life didn't change in that way. I still fix fences. I still feed sheep. I still chase them when they get in trouble. I still sleep at the gate. But at nighttime, when I lay at the gate and I look at the stars, I always remember that night. The night that God came near. The night that God came to lead us to green pastures and still waters. The night that God challenged us to love everybody, to judge none, to not look at externals, but only internals, because that's what God's interested in. And he taught me to never feel inferior, to never feel unworthy, or to never feel totally ordinary, because God can do extraordinary things through ordinary people, like me, and like you. And all I could think is the same song and the way it ends. And take us to heaven. Take us to heaven. And take us to heaven to be with you there. Shalom.